Hello, my friends. Thank you all so much for being here. I see we've already got folks deeding and duding in the chat. Welcome.
Sold 2 tickets.
We've already sold 2 more tickets.
Yeah. Started
So welcome to the second annual SudokuCon 24-hour live stream. We did this last year around this time. A lot of you were here last year. Thank you for coming back again this year. I'm Clover, this is Gliperal. The two of us, as well as Worlpion, are this year's live stream production crew. We're here at Stream headquarters in the middle of nowhere, Kansas. And for the next 24 hours, we're going to be sharing some setting, solving, and general chaos from some community members who were here with us on the 24-hour stream last year, and some folks who are here streaming with us for the first time. We're going to be starting off with Tallcat and friends. They're going to be doing Puzzle Jeopardy. And then Gliperal and I are doing a very interesting interview with Yoshi Anpuku, the president of Nickoli Puzzles. And then something that I can't tell you about after that because it's a surprise. We're going to have Kodra and the Bear That Wasn't doing a Celeste Sudoku % speedrun in the evening.
World first.
Yeah, world first Sudoku % Celeste speedrun. Then we are going over to Night Crew, which this year is Naverio and Mr. Don, representing our Europeans waking up in the morning, and they are going to be solving the Katadoku pillar. They're starting from the beginning, and they're doing tag team solving of the infamous Katadoku pillar. And then from there we go to Glum Hippo, solving pencil puzzles. We've actually got a pencil puzzle block this year. I'm really hyped. Yep. And if you want to decide what Glum Hippo has to solve, if you want him to try out your weirdest and most wonderful genres, go to SudokuCon.com/donate. Is that the URL? And that is where you'll find that incentive, make Glum solve different pencil puzzle genres, and all of our other donation incentives.
There's also, if you type !donate in the chat, it'll give you a link to go straight to that page. And we've got !tickets as well, which is where you can begin.
Somebody just demonstrated how that works, because the focus of this live stream, let me finish the schedule first and then I'll tell them about the ticket sales. So after that we're going back to Sudoku University, which is returning for the second year in a row with full deck, missing a few cards, and some of this year's crop of Sudoku setting students from their class who have agreed to join us again. That was a real highlight of the stream last year. And then Sunday afternoon, we are finishing things off with a visit fromZetamath and Tristan doing their Sunday afternoon solve stream. So like Gliperal suggested, the focus of this stream, we're still accepting donations, we still have donation incentives. If you want to help us out funding the con, we can always use more kind of monetary donations from you guys. That helps do things like defraying costs of attendance for presenters and volunteers and for students and unwaged attendees. However, what we are focused on this stream, and as you can see from the ticker right below us, is ticket sales, because we are officially launching ticket sales for SudokuCon 2025. April 3rd/4th to 6th, 2025. Official check-in is on April 3rd in the evening, and then the program begins on the morning of the 4th. And we are going to be announcing the program officially in about 4 hours from now, give or take.
Yeah, thereabouts.
So if you're curious what's going to happen at the live con in Boston, Massachusetts, April 2025, stick around, and we'll be announcing that once earlier in the evening, and then once again overnight for the European crew. But we're really focusing on ticket sales. Go to SudokuCon.com/tickets to get your ticket. There are also instructions there for booking your hotel room if you want to book in our hotel block. And the con is really happening. This is really the launch. It's going to be an actual thing. Is there anything else I need to tell them? So !donate in the chat, !tickets, and then if you want to see the rules and the title/link for the puzzle that's currently on screen during the solving segments, it's !puzzle and !rules.
Yep.
Do you want to try to explain Markcell?
Yeah, go for it.
Can you try?
So
we have a fun feature for SudokuPad that we're using again this year for the second year.
Yes, while people are solving puzzles in SudokuPad, and we'll try to make it work for pencil puzzles as well. We'll see. Hopefully it does. If you want to have the solver focus on a specific cell, you can donate using the Markcell feature. It's like, 100 bits? 50 bits?
I have no idea what we have it set at. We're very well prepared.
I think it's 50 bits. You can, if you go to the SudokuCon.com/donate page, there'll be a little blurb there that explains what you have to type in chat in order to make that happen. And you will have to purchase bits as well from the Twitch currency. It's like their native thing. But once you have your bits, then you can donate those to our cause, and they'll cause a little flashing animation to appear on screen that tells them to look at that particular cell while they're solving.
So if somebody is just being incredibly, if somebody's just glossing directly over a cell and you know that that would unlock the solve for them, yeah, you can also donate to SudokuCon using Twitch bits and point out the cell that they're missing at the same time.
Yeah.
So feel free to use that.
Bits are basically like, it's 50 cents per cell that you want to mark, so not a bad deal.
Yeah, and so we have a total of 7 blocks. I think I read them all out earlier. There's going to be a 15-minute tech break between each pair of blocks. And our very first block... What are we getting from audio there? Tallcat.
Don't worry, this one can't hear it.
Our very first block is going to be Tallcat and Friends, and they're going to be starting on the hour, so in just about 9 minutes. So in a moment, we're going to go over to a break screen. I want you all deeding and duding furiously in the chat.
And we literally already got our first donation. We
just got our first donation from Palfly. Yeah, Palfly, the button does absolutely work. Thank you for checking out the donation incentives. And any other info that you guys need about SudokuCon, feel free to ask in the chat, and all of it should also be at SudokuCon.com.
Oh, and Palfly put it towards the Katadoku pillar.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, fantastic. And yeah, get going with that donation incentive for the one that says that a team member of the SudokuCon team will solve your puzzle too, because Kodra is potentially going to be solving some of those live at the end of his block if his speedrun goes well. So you may get the opportunity to see your puzzle solved live if you donate that $100 incentive. If it doesn't get solved live, one of our team members will make a video for you, just like we did after the stream last year.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's all I have to tell them right now.
I think that about covers
it. Are we ready to go? Okay.
We've already sold 7 tickets.
Oh, I am so excited. I haven't even bought my ticket yet, and we're gonna run out.
Yep.
We are not capped at 100 tickets, guys. That's just our first ticket sales goal. When we get there, we can talk a little bit more about what kind of continuing ticket sales are going to look like, but please don't hesitate to buy them. This is how you get the early bird ticket prices by purchasing during the stream. Right on. So we're going to go over to a break screen. We're going to have some more deets and doots for a few minutes, and then when we come back, you'll be chatting with Tallcat and friends playing Puzzle Jeopardy.
Good evening, I guess, for me, or good day. Hello. Welcome to the first block of SudokuCon 2024 live stream. I've been very, I don't know if I should say humbled or put upon the spot of taking the first block, but I'm glad to have so many of you here with me. I also have with me 3 erstwhile setters from the community who very kindly agreed to be here on a Saturday evening. So to my left, we have Memeristor.
Hello.
You want to say hello? Below me to the left is James Sinclair.
Hello.
And below me to the right is the Kajito.
Hello.
Just to get into things, this is the Tallcat Variety Hour or so. Only one thing is really accurate about that, and that's that it features me. When I say variety, we're going to do just maybe 2 things. I don't know if that quite covers variety. And it's not really going for an hour. We're going to be here for 3. So, 1 out of 3 isn't bad. But what we're going to do to start is one of the things that's happening in SudokuCon is, in addition to some solving and some setting, there are also going to be opportunities for workshops and panels. And I know in this stream there's going to be plenty of solving going on, as we heard from Clover. And I thought it would be good to have something of a taste of a panel discussion. And so I called upon my 3 compatriots here to join me for that. So we're going to have an hour and a half to 2 hours or so of discussion on various different topics. I have a few in mind. I know these guys have a couple in mind as well. If anyone in the chat has something you want us to talk about, then feel free to shout it out. And then, as Clover mentioned, we're going to go into a puzzle-themed round or 2 of Jeopardy. And having heard from James that he used to do trivia nights many years ago, I'm sure he's going to ace it. But
not.
But yeah, just before I get into that, I want to touch on a couple of things. So I know Clover mentioned there's going to be some official mentioning of the schedule for SudokuCon a bit later on. But I just wanted to touch on a couple of items. I've had a bit of a sneak preview, and a couple of things I'm particularly excited about is there is going to be How to Solve Sudoku Like a World Champion with Thomas Snyder, who is a multiple-time World Sudoku Champion winner, which I'm very, very, very excited about. That's going to be really cool. And then also a real-life puzzle streaming. And as you can see, I'm getting in some practice, so I'm quite looking forward to that. But yes, in addition to that, I also want to plug and thank the tech team, Clover, Gliperal, and Worlpian, but also a special props to Clover and Gliperal, who have had the thankless task of corralling a load of not really very well-versed streamers into actually coming on, getting us all together, getting us in for tech checks and everything. So I want to say up front a big thanks to both of them for their efforts in making the stream happen. So with that in mind, we have a cat next to a cat. Is this Clark or Benny, Memeristor?
This is Clark.
Okay, my namesake. But yeah, before, so let's get into panel discussion. So I'm gonna go to each of my guests here in turn, just they can give a minute or two introduction to themselves, more than just hello, and then we'll go from there. So Memeristor, do you want to start?
Sure, I'm Memeristor, and I'm holding a cat. No, there's more than that, I think. I run a YouTube channel that is focused on setting. We've done some discussion similar to this in the past. We've sort of strewn away from those in recent times, but yeah, recently we made the Sudoku pillar on stream, which was crazy. And right now we're on a little bit of a break. And yeah.
Okay. Thanks for being here. James?
Yeah, I'm James Sinclair. And like I said, been setting puzzles for about 4 years now, and probably the main thing that you might know me from is my weekly newsletter, Artisanal Sudoku, which is primarily Sudokus with common variants.
Okay, thank you. And Kajito?
Yeah, I'm the Kogito, I don't know at this point. I've been setting puzzles for probably about 3.5 years. And yeah, I don't know. I just, I don't know. I started with a lot of Sudoku. Lately, it's been a lot of pencil puzzles, but just kind of like it all. So.
Okay. All right. And many of you know me. I'm Tallcat. I've been setting puzzles for about 3.5 years now. Primarily Sudoku. I haven't quite veered into pencil puzzles yet. I've done a little bit of pencil puzzle hybrids. And I've slowed down a little of late, unfortunately, because real life has gotten in the way, but as it tends to do. But still managing to plug away and setting a few puzzles. So, all right. So let us get into discussion. So I know before we came, when we were talking about the idea of this, we banded around a few possible topics of discussion. And so I wanted to start actually with, and I think this would be interesting because as James mentioned, he does artisanal Sudoku. And my perspective of that is that James is something of a setting machine. Whereas me, when it comes to setting puzzles, I tend to work a little slower. And so I would like to turn open to all of you. How do you begin setting a puzzle? How do you even begin to start? You have the blank grid in front of you. Where do you start? So, James, you're as I say, I think a setting machine. So I'd be curious to hear your insight on this.
I mean, most of the time when I sit down to set a puzzle, I don't have any sense of what it might be for. I just kind of set puzzles and then I figure out later what they're good for. And so a lot of times it's just kind of staring at a blank grid and just trying to think of a shape or a pattern or something. And then I draw that in and I kind of ask, like, is there anything interesting about this? And if I find something, then I run with it, and if I don't, then I draw something else. So that's
So you
often what
say
it is.
a lot of it is quite visual. You're trying to look for an interesting shape or something.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, it's rare that I start out with like a big concept in mind. I mean, because I guess I don't know how often do any of us start out with a big concept in mind.
I mean, a lot of the times it's either like a big concept, like, oh, I want this deduction in this variant because I like the deduction. I don't think it gets a lot of love. But rarely do you actually end up making something around the thing that you think you're going to make it around, because it just kind of has a mind of its own and starts to take over. Like, you can draw anything into the grid and then there's be something interesting about it.
Yeah, and I when I said, like, how often do any of us do that? Like, if I'm like setting 5 puzzles a day, it's like they're not all going to be based on something that I've been thinking about for a long time. If I just did one a week, then maybe it would be. So that's all I meant there.
Yeah, I think I like I do agree that puzzles tend to sort of have a mind of their own. But yeah, I've mostly, for me, I kind of partly subscribe to the visual thing. And anyone who's seen my puzzles a lot of my puzzles usually have some shape, and I nearly always end up with a one-word title reflecting what that shape is. But I've occasionally had some. I used to try and start a little more with having an idea of an opening. But my biggest problem with that is I tend to have the idea of an opening and then it just sits there for about 6 months because I have no idea what to do with it. So, and Kajito, I guess, as you say, you've veered into pencil puzzles a little more. Would you say you have a similar approach for both?
Yes. And so like you, I don't set particularly quickly. I mean, I think I used to set a little faster, but I don't know. I just I kind of like taking my time. Sometimes if I don't have an idea, I would really struggle making like a weekly newsletter, for example, just because it's like I have a hard time forcing myself to. And I know I'm not saying you force yourself to, but I have a hard time forcing myself to come up with ideas for puzzles. So like I'll think of something that sounds like an interesting thought, just an initial thought, and I just kind of just roll with it and just kind of see where that leads me. But that's pretty much how they all always start, is honestly just an initial inkling of an idea.
And James, for you, like, do you have some kind of? I know a lot. I guess if you're quite prolific, you probably have a few sort of favored constraints that you might dip into as a starting point. Would you say that's fair? Or
I feel like if just somehow I was required to only use cages and arrows, like I'm not sure that my output would be all that different. And I kind of try to force myself to use different constraints just for variety, but a lot of times I think my best puzzles are the ones that are just using cages and arrows.
That's fair. I mean, a lot of my puzzles use arrows, so I can agree with you on that. And I'm a fan of Killer Sudoku. I think nothing quite kicks like a well-designed and well-structured Killer Sudoku, so I can support you on that. But I guess so once you've had the initial idea, whatever it is, and it's beginning to develop, and this kind of touches on what Memeristor had said, like how the puzzle can sort of sometimes take on a mind of its own. Do you guys try to craft something of a solve path as best you can? Do you think it's important to have a robust solve path? I guess it also depends on the level of difficulty you might be aiming for. So those are all questions, I guess, to start, if anyone wants to pick up.
I guess I'll just start off and just say that a lot of times, a lot of the puzzles that I end up setting lately, especially, are kind of on the wilder side as far as just kind of complex combination of rules, or just really odd combination of rules that maybe I haven't seen together before. And a lot of times when I first start, if I was to just start right off the bat and try to construct a solve path, I'm not sure that would work, because it's like, for me, I'm sitting there, really my first thought is, how can I get something, and literally anything, in the grid? Because you know, it's like I guess there's two different ways that this tends to go down for me. It's I will literally just find anything I can to fill something in, and just start filling it in, and kind of just go from there. And then the alternative is where I go through that process, and then I sort of restart with my newfound knowledge and actually try to construct a more cohesive sort of break-in, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're a very, it's interesting that you jumped in first there, because I think of everyone here, you certainly have what I would call a couple of puzzles that are definitely out there in terms of concept. Like, I remember when you first approached me with the idea of like doing the 4-rank deconstruction, and I was like, that's just insanity. And yet you somehow made it work. So
yeah, I still remember Henry P.I. James, his comment was that he thought it was insane that the puzzle resolved, and even more insane that someone actually said it. I don't know, that puzzle, I'm very proud of that puzzle, but actually going through the process of setting it was perhaps regrettable. It was so difficult. But I'm happy to have it done.
When you're setting something like that, that's so ridiculous and so difficult to set, which often, if you have an idea to start with, it will end up being so difficult to set, because that's just how it is. If you have something you want to do, it just will try not to be the thing that you're doing. Often those cannot have a like solve path that is rigid, because it's just wherever is possible, it just takes you in that direction. So it's not like you're deciding the solve path at that point. The solve path decides itself.
Yeah, I think that's why. I guess it depends on the choice of interacting constraints as well. Sometimes something is just so constrained by itself. I mean, I think so. Kajito and I did a collaboration, which was, as I remember, it was quads, and was it anti-XV?
I think that sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, and we stealth, I know the puzzle was called, and I know you approached me with the opening, and it was one of those things that I looked at and I was like, well, this just seems ridiculous. How is it even possibly ever going to resolve? And then when you actually stopped and looked at it, it was just like, actually, there was quite an awful lot of restraint just from having an anti-X, anti-V. And I think in that we tried reasonably. I think we succeeded reasonably well at having some sort of path through, but it was quite easy for people to get lost.
Yeah, well, negative constraints in general are just really challenging. Global and negative constraints are so challenging. It's very easy to find a unique grid with some of them, but it's very hard to try to deliberately construct something that you're pleased with, because they're so restricted inherently. But yeah, no, I remember being pretty happy with that one. But yeah, no, it definitely does. Those, I mean, you talk about setting themselves, some of those kinds of constraints really do just kind of, the puzzle just sort of becomes unique, like a third of the way through it. And
I know James and I had something of an experience recently. We collaborated on, on James' second chaos construction. And that was an interesting experience. I know that was your first collaboration, right, James?
Yes, it was.
And I'd solved James' first chaos construction, which was usually against my kind of against my Sudoku belief because it involved anti-night. But it was just a sensible amount of anti-night, if ever there is such a thing. And so I gave it a shot and enjoyed it. And I mentioned to James that I enjoyed it. And he was like, hey, I've got this crazy idea for a second follow-up. And
like an absolute maniac.
yes. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. But I remember the first time you showed me the grid and you had something like, I think, maybe 10 or 12 circles and diamonds and squares in. And I was like, wow, that's an awful lot. And I don't think it provides that much information.
Yeah, there are a lot of very important things that you brought to that collaboration. And one of them absolutely is patience, because that is not really a thing that I'm very good at. You know, if I'm still working on a puzzle after 45 minutes, I'm kind of ready to just move on. So yeah, the way that you know, working together, you're able to kind of like really focus on each step, and we, you know, that's not something that I would be very good at on my own.
Oh,
Yeah,
man.
I think
like to think of it like there's a bunch of mini puzzles within the puzzle. Each deduction is like its own little puzzle.
If anyone hasn't solved it, it's called Second Rodeo. So, sorry, Kajito, go on.
As far as, I mean, yeah, 45 minutes is like I've maybe I've maybe not put anything down yet after 45 minutes. Sometimes not at all. Just sat there thinking about it. It's way slower for me. Way slower.
I do remember when
I'm exaggerating a little bit.
I do remember very early on in my setting career, though, I think I'd set a few puzzles, and I actually think it was Clover. Someone was talking about a speed setting competition, and they said, oh, you only have like 45 minutes to an hour. And at the time, I was just like, what? It's not possible to set something in an hour. And I think it was Clover said, no, give it a try. You might surprise yourself. And I actually managed to set a puzzle in 15 minutes. I don't think it was very good, but, you know, when I actually sat and thought about it. But yeah, I think I do remember one thing I remember in the whole collaboration with James is that I would be it kind of consumed me for, I think, about a week. And every now and then I would email James and be like, hey, what about this? What about this? And he'd be like, I like that. And then about maybe 2 hours later, he'd be like, okay, have a look at this. I'm going to go on to something else. And then I would kind of work away at it again. But I think it actually ended up as a good balance of styles, and I don't think it. I think the end product ended up very well. It kind of there were definite steps in there that were much more James, and some in there that were definitely me.
Yeah, I'm very happy with it. It's definitely a puzzle that I could not have made on my own. It may well be one that you could have made on your own.
Yeah, well, not if it involved anti-night, because I mentioned, yeah. But so actually, that is a good segue, though. So one of the things that I had thrown around as an idea is talking about favored constraints or favorite puzzle types, I guess, and also kind of hated constraints. So I don't know if anyone on the stream has ever read the George Orwell book in 1984, but there is a concept in 1984 of Room 101, which is a place that all your worst nightmares reside, and it's where they send you to be tortured. And there was a show in the UK a few years ago called Room 101, where celebrities would come on and they would get to consign things that they absolutely detested and hated into Room 101. And so I thought, we'll start with the positive, but I thought it would be good at some point for all of us to maybe consider what constraints would we like to consign to Room 101 and consign to Oblivion. The constraints, I guess, that if we were taken to Room 101, we would be tortured with. But we'll get to that. But I guess on the flip side, what would you guys think are constraints that are some of your favorite? And James, you mentioned cages and arrows to start. Do you want to add to that or sort of expand on why you like?
I mean, like arrows especially. There's just so much you can do with them. You've got geometry, you've got arithmetic. You can make like cool looking designs with them. I mean, I don't know. That's just kind of
Yeah. You can do more complex as well, because you can do like arrow sums as well. That's a whole extra dimension. True. Okay, Kajisa, what about you?
I mean, I know it's a little bit cliched at this point lately for people to say that Ubon is like their favorite thing, but I really have been liking Ubon. For those who may or may not be familiar with Ubon, I mean, it's just where you're drawing a loop network with crosses, branches, straights, and turns. But I've been really enjoying that. But I mean, as far as Sudoku goes, it's always been Renbon. Renbon's just always been the thing that's always appealed to me. Don't know why. I haven't really set anything with Renbon lately. Probably should fix that at some point. But
I do remember. I think one of your puzzles, Renban Rocket, that I remember solving and really enjoying. And I think it actually inspired some of the logic in that. Actually inspired one of the killer puzzles. I swiped a bit of the geometry logic for a killer puzzle.
Yeah, no, Renbon Rocket was really cool. I mean, that was like the pure Renbon, just vanilla Renbon, and I mean, I think that was probably one of my greatest successes, as at least at just keeping a simple rule set, trying to use just making a puzzle with a simple rule set and making it nice. And I do think that one stands out in that sense for sure.
Yep. Meme, what about you?
Oh, it's always going to be Killer. I mean, Killer is so fun, but I really like taking Killer and like putting a little variant on it, like having an extra piece of information, maybe like different cages. Like I've been playing around with cages of the same size, of the same sum, but you don't know what any of the sums are. That's a pretty fun one. Or like the kangaroo cages, just something silly that I came up with, but just something that's
explain what kangaroo cages are.
So kangaroo cages are apparently horrendously difficult to work with, as I found out from the solve counts of my puzzles. But they're essentially, there's a big cage, and then you have to split that cage into two separate cages which have the same sum. One has to be smaller than the other. That's the basic idea.
Okay. I do remember, I think I test solved one of your early puzzles with that, and it was interesting, I guess is about the best. But yeah, I can understand how that would be hard to set with. For me, I mean, arrows were kind of my first love getting into Sudoku. That's actually what got me into Sudoku to begin with, mostly because of Jovial and her setting video, which was about an arrow Sudoku. And I was like, oh, that sounds like fun. I can do that. After that, I mean, I think Zeta would say Between Lines are probably one of my favorite, but while I enjoy drawing shapes with between lines in the grid, they're actually quite tricky to work with because you nearly always end up with like triples that you have to try and resolve in some way. I do find it interesting that none of us sort of touched on any constraints outside the grid. But I guess we all just like drawing shapes.
I'm waiting for the next section.
Oh, okay.
Since you mentioned it, I did forget skyscrapers. I love skyscrapers.
Oh, really?
I've only done like one or two like just standard skyscraper puzzles, but I've done a bunch that kind of use them in different ways.
Skyscrapers can be used for either good or evil, and
yes, and it depends on who you are as to which it is. Yeah, actually, Dream Librarian notes in chat. No one mentioned quadruples either. I do like quads. I guess the thing. I mean, I've set a few puzzles with quads, but it's nearly always been in it's always been in combination with something else, because I don't know if I can get enough out of just quads by themselves. I think you have a couple of the quad tricks
at that point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to be fair though, like I think Clover has I forget what the name of the puzzle is, but Clover set a quad puzzle maybe about a year or so ago that was just a pure quad puzzle, and it really showed what you can do with them. I just have not quite got the skill or the ideas with them. I always want to mix them with something else, but yeah, I'm surprised. I know a Rubberoy, that was it, and it was like a series of quads, like in a circle in the top left and the bottom right, and it was very, very. I mean, as you'd expect from Clover, it was very well put together. But okay, so we've been nice. We've done the nice. We've observed the niceties. So now let's go on to the free for all of constructs that you want to assign to Oblivion. It sounds like Kajito has a couple in mind, so we'll start with him.
I mean, really, the main one, honestly, it's just I just don't enjoy X-Sums. I don't know. I know some people like them. I just don't like X-Sums. I don't know. It's just kind of it. Not because they're inherently bad, but they just tend to highlight the thing that I don't enjoy doing, which is just sitting there doing math, which is because I don't know, some level of math. I am a kind of a math guy, the science, math, numbers guy. So it's like some level of math is fine, but I don't know, something about X-Sums. I love sandwiches, but yeah, X-Sums. I don't like Tallcat. I don't love Anti-Night. It's Anti-Night. It's so hard to find an Anti-Night puzzle that really feels nice, at least to me. But yeah, I mean, those two would be the main ones.
I would say, I think after when I did a stream with Malrog, and I was cursing out Anti-Night there, and he actually gave me a link to one of his puzzles that was Anti-Night that actually I felt was a reasonable use of Anti-Night, and it was an interesting use of Anti-Night. My issue with Anti-Night, I mean, is just I feel that I've done maybe one too many bad Anti-Night puzzles where you end up having to almost pencil mark the entire grid to find that one cell that sees all the possible digits by Anti-Night, and then it just
part of the
collapses.
problem with the constraint, in my opinion, is that if you don't have to do that to solve it, it very well could be like a 2-star puzzle, because they just fall apart really easily. It's just really hard to find the balance between like needing to heavily pencil mark it and just totally coasting.
And that kind of touches what we were saying earlier about how a puzzle, the puzzle can kind of just take itself out of your hands, and that probably happens more so with Anti-Night than others.
I would say the very best Anti-Night puzzles are the ones where in the middle of the solve, you forgot that there was Anti-Night, and it's still solved just fine. But then if you didn't forget it was Anti-Night, it's still annoying, because then you're still looking for these annoying deductions, even if you don't have to look for them. So it's completely out of your control whether it's a good puzzle or not, because it would be great if we could just forget about the Anti-Night. If it could turn off at some point, that would be
Anti-Night break-in only.
Yes, break-in
only. James, you've I think set a few Anti-Night puzzles. So do you wanna defend in any way before we get on to your?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I generally agree with everything that's been said. The ones that I have set that I'm proud of certainly have more clues than are strictly necessary to kind of smooth out the post break-in. I mean, I think that's probably, like having a break-in that requires Anti-Night to be interesting, and then like, use more clues than you need to smooth things out after that, I think is the way to approach it.
Yeah, I think is it Kapateki here in the chat says the Anti-Night constraint is too powerful in that it can force a unique solution in unintuitive ways. Which, so yeah, I think adding what people would say are superfluous clues is definitely a good approach to smooth that out. James, I know when I mentioned this kind of subject for discussion, you seemed to also have something in mind. So do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, so I've never been a huge fan of thermometers. I don't know why. There's just not a whole lot that you can do with them. But one thing that you can do with them is geometry. You can use the fact that digits can't repeat on a thermometer, and so that there's a lot of and then somebody came along and was like, "What if we take that away?" And so that's slow thermometers, and I'm just not a fan.
And I think you said, so you accept puzzle submissions, I think, right, for your newsletter, and you
Yes.
had to ban slow thermometers, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
It's okay.
And
it's okay.
I will say slow thermos probably deserve slow thermos are really, they're just not where it's at. I've never asked someone what they like solving and heard back slow thermos.
I'm sure that there's a way to use them brilliantly, but I have not personally seen it.
I'm just gonna
mid variant. I mean, thermometer already is a very mid variance.
Oh, interesting. Just noting there's that rolling on the floor. Roth's a lot is raiding with a party of 14. So hello to new guests. Welcome to the SudokuCon stream. I actually quite like, although I've not set too many pure thermo puzzles. I think 2, 3 maybe. I actually quite like thermos. I think mostly for the geometry angle as well, perhaps more than anything else. Although I think if you're going to have something that's like what digits can't repeat on, then I would probably say Ramban would be better. But because I think they're kind of like, sort of like thermos, but maybe that little bit extra constraint, because if you have a digit on it, it automatically forces sort of a range of digits, whereas thermos have too much that additional flexibility if you could go from 2 to 5 to 9 to whatever.
And so, I may as well say that I know I was just saying I was really happy with this full rank puzzle I set. I will never set another puzzle with full rank personally. Partially because that was so difficult, but also full rank is another. I'm in agreement with. I know full rank gets a bad rep, but I think for the most part it's for a good reason, which is that it's really kind of monotonous. But now though mine was not a standard full rank, so I mean that kind of kept things a little bit more diverse, I suppose. So it's kind of a wild puzzle.
Yeah,
but.
Yeah, you threw some.
There are enjoyers. I know the pedaling pianist loves full rank, but yeah, I'm just not a big fan. Even though I've set like one of my, I suppose, magnum opus type puzzles was full rank, it's still just not doesn't do it for me.
Okay, and Memeristor, what about you? Do you have any particularly despised constraints?
I mean, other than the ones I already mentioned, I'm trying to think of.
Memeristor's Canadian, so I think he has to really like dig deep to find the kind of.
The thing is that I feel like I haven't been reminded of any of the bad ones because I've just been avoiding them.
Well, that's a choice.
I see Demano mentioned disjoint in the chat, and I was thinking, oh yeah, I didn't even think about that because I never think about that.
Disjoint, I don't know if I would say it's something that I dislike, but also, oh yes, I don't like X, Y, Z, and thank you, indexing either when you have to do indexing, but more than one direction is unintuitive.
Oh, so kind of like if this is a pill and it means that this digit has to be in this box in this position, that digit kind of thing.
Occasionally they can be okay, but I find anything that is very much like I have to have the row column numbers on, and I'm constantly like squinting my eyes and counting and double checking that I've covered every possible scenario. It's just tedious to me.
It's interesting. It's interesting when it comes into constraints that we like chat doesn't say much, and then when it comes to constraints that we hate, that's it. Chat just suddenly starts scrolling like a ticker. Neverio.
We didn't have any controversial likes, though.
Yeah, Neverio says little killer. Nad331 says doublers and Schrodinger cells are annoying. But then we got some coming back saying little killer is fun. Yeah, little killer. I guess little killer is a bit like slow thermometers in a way for me, in that it takes some of the fun part of killers and then adds that you can repeat digits in, and just it's like, oh great, so you've just made it less fun.
I think little killers have their place. Go ahead.
You just said you don't like X sums, and you're defending little killers.
X sums. What I'm saying is, little killers. You can use small little killers. If you're using only small X sums, you like half the digits can't even resolve.
It's like you have to have. Thank you, Skojo. I want to change my answer. German whispers. I don't like them. There's a good take. I don't like German whispers. Their pure German whisper is. I never want to see a pure German whisper again. It's so boring. It's always the exact same puzzle, this over and over again. And I've made my fair share of them, and they're terrible.
That's very interesting, because I think one of my puzzles that you liked was a pure German whisper puzzle.
Yeah, and then I solved it 800 times.
Oh, so I just caught it at the crest of the wave. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Exactly.
Sorry, James, I think you're going to say something about little killers.
Just that I feel like there was a phase where it was popular to use them because you could kind of disambiguate, multiple deadly patterns at the same time. And I don't know. I've never liked that. I mean, I'm kind of more okay with them as, as part of a break-in, but as disambiguators, I don't really care for them.
I think if I think of somebody who I thought used little killers well, like Kodak had a puzzle that I want to say was called, something like Little Nuts or something like that, and it was like an odd even puzzle, and it had little killers in, and it was focusing on parity and stuff like that. And I remember solving that and thinking that Kodak did that very well. So for mine, I think we all know, I mean, Anti-Night, but we've kind of done that one to death. Outside of that, there was a time that I would have absolutely said this up front, and it's more of a mechanic than I guess a constraint. But I'm beginning to modify my opinion somewhat, and that would have been, I would have put Fog of War absolutely 100% into it. But I think I'm modifying. I take that back a bit more now, because I think I can see how, and maybe this is me trying to be generous and charitable interpretation of it, but James's puzzle that featured the other day, the Fog of War, which kind of put a spin on it, but I appreciated how that actually was sort of using the fog as a way to almost like as a tutorial of sorts. So I think people who may be approaching Sudoku at a very variant Sudoku at maybe a less advanced level could use Fog of War puzzles maybe as a tool to sort of help them spot deductions on a grid that doesn't have fog.
There's this idea that fog puzzles are harder, but I mean I think it can just as easily be used to make an interesting puzzle easier and more approachable. Which I think a lot of the better fog puzzles are kind of done that way.
Yeah. I was waiting for someone to bring up the fog controversy. I think it depends on like the way that you use the fog and how you set it, and certainly it can be used as an introductory sort of way. But I think people who use it more as a way to constrain the solve path, so you have to take one route when the fog is not actually needed for the puzzle at all, is is not a great use, I would say.
James, you set a few fog puzzles, right? I mean, I seem to recall you setting quite a
Yeah,
few.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I put one out at least once a month in the newsletter, and I've also put a few on LND.
I guess I mean, I as I say, I kind of retract my sort of misgivings of it somewhat qualified. I think, like Memeristor says, my issue is that if people use it just, and it's like the fog doesn't really need to be there, they're just using it as a way to say, well, I'm just going to highlight this part of the grid because I have no other way to highlight this part of the grid as where I want the puzzle to start. I guess it sort of ties in somewhat into, it sort of makes the puzzle a bit more almost like a game as well. Well, and while that's not necessarily inherently a bad thing, I think that kind of, and there's always the out, I think, with Fog of War, that if you're really, really stuck, you can just be like, well, I'm just going to plug in the digits and find the one that clears the fog. I think your new puzzle is kind of going to screw people up on that somewhat. Although, I mean, was that your concept in setting that one?
I mean, if you want to know where that came from, it was. I mean, people have suggested for as long as fog has been around, like, what if? I mean, I guess for anybody who hasn't seen it, it's a puzzle where when you enter a digit, it might clear fog somewhere, but not necessarily around that digit. And that's something that people have been suggesting for as long as fog has been around. And I kind of just got frustrated with seeing it suggested so often that I was like, why don't I just do it? And of course, like, I didn't have the programming know-how, so I kind of just like did a DIY version of it and put that out, and that where the solver had to kind of like shade the grid and like unshade it based on what digits they put in, and so and that kind of showed Sven that it was possible, and then he did the work to actually make it happen.
Okay.
Kind of forget what the question was, but yeah, that was born a little bit out of frustration.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I guess again, I felt like as I was solving that puzzle, it was a very good, almost like tutorial tool, because you almost had to make or it's like you had a specific deduction almost designed that they had to actually make it for that, and the fog might not necessarily clear, so it kind of was like a sort of first order, second order thing.
Yeah, that occurred to me, and I'm really interested to see what people do with this now that it's out there. But yeah, that it could be used as like a tutorial technique.
Yeah, nice. Kajita, you have any thoughts on fog that haven't been?
Nothing that hasn't been said, really. I mean, I think that, like you said, when it's used to draw attention to a part of the grid, because there's seemingly no other way to draw attention to that part of the grid without using it, that's a little bit less engaging. But
so I guess
like honest,
many other things can be used for good, and it can be used for evil.
Yeah, I just don't solve a lot of fog puzzles. I don't know. There's something nice about just having a blank grid for me. I know that Cracking the Cryptic likes featuring fog puzzles because they're kind of visually striking, right? And some of them are quite nice, but I just don't. I haven't dove into them too much.
Yeah, and I think I sort of I as I say, I go all the way from wanting to consign them into Room 101, as it were, because I do think that they are something that probably could appeal to maybe a less advanced or maybe a less engaged solving audience as a way to kind of hook them in. So in that sense, I approve of using fog as a tool for evil to hook people into puzzling, and then we can just take advantage of them in other ways. Okay. So I guess, I mean, touching on fog, though, that kind of is a nice segue, because I think fog came on the scene maybe, a year and a half, 2 years ago, I think?
You say 2 years ago.
Yeah, 2 probably.
Yeah, and no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, because I think I actually had like maybe the second fog puzzle that was featured, and it was like around this time, about 2 years ago.
And I think since then there's almost been like, I wouldn't say an explosion, but there's been quite a lot of interesting new trends, variants, spins, different ways to add variety to puzzles. I think the Katadoku pillar actually was a really good example. I was after watching the stream on Monday and realizing that part of the reason my computer was crashing when I was trying to solve that was because I hadn't turned the killer calculator off. I actually went back and continued to solve it. And I actually think I'm going to continue and try and force my way through it. One handy thing is at least having Gliperal and Clover's stream, that if I get really, really struck, I can watch two far more experienced solvers than me work through the puzzle and get a hint from them. But I think it actually really showcased just kind of some crazy, wacky variants out there. So what are your thoughts on, I guess, some of the more recent trends in Sudoku, or I guess in puzzling? I mean, I think one thing that's very common is, one thing that's growing more common, and I think probably because of the Rat Run series, but I think it started even before then, is like the idea of having almost a world building around the puzzle, or it's like inspired by a fairy tale. So instead of having Kropke, you're replacing them with like a pie or a blueberry or something like that. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
That's been a trend since, I don't even know when, like 2020 we had, who was it? Ricky Cruz. Every puzzle Ricky Cruz made was around some kind of theme, like a Frogger puzzle or a Monopoly or something he did. I can't even remember. It was,
yeah, I mean, I know CTC did a couple of like Clue ones as well. I guess I feel like there's been not an explosion, but I feel like there's been a huge uptick in that from lately, just from going on like LMD. Yeah, Sandra and Nala were doing world building story. Yeah, as I say, the Rat Runs I think are a good recent example of it, but I think this is something that has certainly been on the uptick lately. James, what about you? Have any thoughts?
I mean, I'll just personally, I'm glad that other people are doing that so that I don't have to, because that feels exhausting to me. You know, I love making puzzles. I don't love writing an essay about them. But yeah, I mean, yeah, like Marty Sears' puzzles are amazing. I'm glad they're out there. I don't.
Jiso, how about you?
Yeah, I guess I don't really have an opinion. Yeah, for me, the emphasis is more on the puzzles, and I doubt I will ever set any sort of world building type exercise, because for me, it's just, I just want to, the rules are, for a lot of times, if it's something I want to set, the rules are complicated enough. I don't need to add.
Yeah, you're right. You're writing an essay and writing the rules.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. It's just not something I've really considered much.
Again, I think it's something that it's not something I don't think I will necessarily do myself. Although I did think, I know we touched upon this a bit, James, when we were collaborating. But you mentioned you thought about doing a sort of riff on the Rat Run series, and I think somebody actually. I want to say I saw a puzzle today. I think it was Skojo there was a cat in a house that has the zoomies, and you have to have the cat do a path around the house before it gets to its bed. And I thought that was like quite an amusing riff on the Rat Run. But again, I think it's sort of it's something that I think. So one thing that occurred to me recently when I was thinking about it is that. So years and years ago, when I was studying pure chemistry, I was absolutely terrible at it, which is odd because I'm now a biochemist. But when I actually was talking about things in test tubes, I found it really hard. But when you were talking about things in a human cell, for some reason, my brain was able to find that more relatable. And so again, I think they could be good tools to they're good tools and sort of text as a way to kind of draw people into puzzles in a way that they might not necessarily. And certainly I agree. Like, I mean, I was scrolling through Marty's LMD page the other day, and it's just so many different sort of variations and themes and ideas. And I was like, my God, my brain I felt my brain is much more cold and logical. I don't think I could quite have the effort to do it. And so I applaud those that can. Yeah, like Juggler says, done right, the theme helps people remember the rules. I guess certainly done wrong, you then forget the that could be a disaster as well. But
I guess it just kind of goes to show that like the puzzling world is not just cold, logical people. It also has a lot to do with creativity. I mean, this is a really creative process of making puzzles, and I think it's inevitable that someone comes up with more creative language arts ways to be creative in the space as well.
Yeah, and I think I was going to mention, and actually Demono mentions as well, like Demono did a Patreon reward, I think, for CTC, I want to say over a year and a half ago, that was kind of a novel or a story that involved puzzles as well, and has since begun to develop that whole concept further, and is actually one of, along with Artisanal Sudoku, James's newsletter, Demono's Adventure Hunt concepts are actually sponsors of SudokuCon as well. So I would certainly encourage to check that out as well. Yeah, May 2023. Yeah. So just before we go on to the next subject, I just see a ticket update of we have 14 out of 100 tickets sold. We also had a $10 donation. I know it was a while ago by Pulfly. I meant to call that out. So tickets hype indeed. 14 out of 100. 14 down. 86 to go. Is that right? I don't know. Math isn't my strong.
We're not even an hour in, so.
Yeah, exactly. That's great, though. But I got my ticket early, so I will be at SudokuCon, and I'm looking forward to meeting some of you there. So sort of segueing into, I know this is something we have kind of talked about to death, and I think it's interesting in that we have different levels of setters in terms of the difficulty of the puzzles. Now, I know James has set some harder puzzles, including the one that we did together. But when I think of James, I tend to think of puzzles that are much more approachable, sort of mid-range to easier. When I think of Kajito, at least in terms of some of his craziness, they're just bonkers. But even some of the more standard puzzles can be a little on the harder side. And that sort of aligns a little more with most of mine. So how when you sit down to set a puzzle, do you think, are you often aiming for a difficulty? If you have a wacky concept that you just know is probably going to be 5 out of 5 to begin with, do you just kind of say, hey, I'm all in, I'm going for full craziness difficulty? Or, do you sit down with an intent of a difficulty in mind? And what are ways that you would work to kind of craft that? So, James, I think because your puzzles tend to be more approachable, you'd be a good start.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, like I said earlier, most of the time when I sit down to set a puzzle, I don't really have, an idea of like what it's going to be for, and so I think of it as I let the puzzle decide its own difficulty. So sort of once I have an idea that sort of works and a break-in that's built around that idea, then it's like, all right, well, how hard was that? And then like, all right, well, that's the difficulty that I'm aiming for going forward, and I kind of just try to keep it consistent from there.
Okay, and what about you, Kajito? I mean, you've had definitely had some, I think, 2-star puzzles on LMD.
Yeah, I've had a few that were pretty on the easier side. Those were intentional exercises for the most part, although not always. 2 or 3 stars, I've had a few. I don't know. I certainly don't go into it thinking I'm going to make something really hard. I don't think I've ever done that necessarily. I have certainly gone into puzzles thinking this is going to be really hard, just because it's going to be hard. It doesn't matter because I have no say in the matter. It's going to be hard. It's going to be a hard puzzle. But I don't know. For me, it's I probably do get a little bit more enjoyment out of making harder puzzles, harder steps. For me, making puzzles, I it's like ultimately I like finding things that make me feel clever, and then I feel like if I put those in, maybe if someone else finds it in the same way, they will feel that same feeling that I just felt. Now that said, I also totally understand that that people have different scales that they operate in as far as what they enjoy solving, and it's like I certainly also in the past I haven't really been as much lately, but like even like the gas puzzles, just flying through those, that I feel clever doing that too. But when I'm setting, I don't know, for some reason I just like digging in on things, and that just kind of naturally tends to produce harder puzzles.
Well, how about you, Memeristor? And I guess adding on to that, so Dream Librarian sort of mentioned something you just said, Kajito, about would you say setters set the type of puzzles they like to solve? So do you want to pick that up as well, Meme? As well as answering the difficulty?
I think, Kagito answered that a little bit by saying that he likes to solve easier puzzles as well, but not that he doesn't set any easy puzzles. I think also Kagito's right that not a lot of the 1-star puzzles, because there isn't a lot of 1-star puzzles in either of our catalogs, but the 1-star puzzles that exist that either of us have made have been like an intentional exercise in trying to make something that isn't impossible. If you just kind of let the puzzle go where it wants, as we've been saying quite a few times today, it'll naturally lend towards the kind of deductions that you like to find. So then typically I think that I like to find deductions that are like, whoa, that's really weird. And those tend to be harder deductions, because something that's really easy and you can see without even really thinking that much about it are typically ones where you're like, that's weird. I wouldn't have expected that. Sometimes they are, and those are amazing puzzles. Am I good at setting those? No, no, not really. I've found that out over the years. But typically for the easier puzzles, or even the mid-range puzzles, I have to be a little bit more strict with myself and say like, no, we're not going to go through that coloring exercise. We're just going to add this little line here that allows them to skip that, because that's pretty hard, even though it's really cool and I'll use that later. So yeah, I think keeping your puzzles like at a consistent difficulty requires a little bit of self-control, for me at least. I think James is more practiced at setting a consistent difficulty no matter what, but you want to comment on that, James?
Well, another thing that I do is when I set a puzzle and I finish it, like I save a link, I save a screenshot, and I put it in my spreadsheet, and I don't think about it again for usually at least 2 months. And so then when I'm kind of going back through my, through the puzzles that I set months ago, I'm kind of approaching them fresh. And so I'm able to sort of evaluate, like, did I really stick to the right difficulty throughout this one? Stuff like that. So, I think I've kind of learned, gotten kind of good at getting it right the first time. But I also have a fair number of them where, like, when I go back through it, it's like, this one kind of gets a little tougher toward the end. I need to revise it.
I think I'm trying to think. Is it Turganus who was quite guilty of, often quite guilty of like usually when I think of my puzzles, I think like the opening is usually the hardest part. Not all of them, but some of them I have like, it's more of a concept of a break-in, and it's that's the hardest step, and after then it usually can sort of lend itself a little easier to collapsing. Maybe some of my earlier puzzles are not so much because of my inexperience at the time. But I do have a couple of sort of Taganis-like steps where it's like as the puzzle goes along, you have like a steeper and steeper difficulty curve and a learning curve. And I know I have a couple of puzzles that at the time I was setting them, I was like, oh, this is a perfectly reasonable step. And then someone tested it and said, yeah, this was great for like 15 minutes. And then I hit a brick wall for one step. And then I got past that brick wall and then it collapsed. Like, what the hell were you thinking? And I was like, oh,
I have to say that definitely happens to me. I've pretty much just chalked it up to, that's something I have to be like really cognizant of, because I've basically just chalked it up to, I'm fairly confident at this point that I spot things differently and it's some sort of different order or something than most people, because there are a lot of times I will have a step in there that I spotted like absolutely instantly, and then tester after tester says that it was really, really hard. So I don't know. It's just something to be aware of, I guess.
Yeah, I think I've definitely had that experience once or twice with your puzzles, that I've been like, oh yeah, I did all this, and you're just like, what? But all you had to do was this. And I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, whoops, missed that one. Actually, so just looking at the chat, so Podfly had mentioned a while back, and we can skip back. We had the discussion about constraints earlier. Like they were curious about other underused constraints that we really like, and I guess quads are probably actually, I think, an underused constraint that I've begun to dabble a bit more with. How about you, Memeristor? Any underused constraints that you particularly like?
How new some of the ones that were in the SudokuCon were, but some of them were really interesting, like things that I had never seen before, like hit points, and I'm trying to think of other ones, but some of them were really cool, and I'd like to see more of them, or maybe there is more of them and I'm just ignorant of that fact.
There was one I did recently that was a remote sums, a remote cages, I think, or remote sums. And it was like where you have a cage. It's like you have basically a split killer cage where the digit in the cage points to a cell like X number or Y number away that is the remote sum. I thought that was a really interesting idea. I mean, it took me like 3 goes to solve the puzzle because I apparently was horrendous at them. So I don't know if I'll be quite rushing to set that one myself yet, but that was interesting.
There's another one with that rule set where there's also Cogito's favorite X sums that they can also look at digits outside the grid, which was interesting as well. But
right. Yes, I remember that. I think I remember that from. I didn't solve that one, but I think I remember that from from Gliperal and Clover's stream.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say that's underused, because I'm not sure I would love to see that in a harder context. But
yeah, Kajira was just like, how can you make X sums even more despised right now? All right, James, how about you?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
Well, I mean, I said a lot of puzzles, so I'm not sure there's any constraints that I'm underusing.
Yes.
But I mean, one that I always enjoy when it shows up that I think is 10 lines.
As what? Sorry, say again. 10 lines.
10 lines. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was. Was it Zeta who came up with that, or was he just?
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah, one thing with Zeta though is I tend to find that he'll use a constraint that seems new, and then it's like actually somebody used it like 10 years ago. But
no,
I certainly know he
popularized
it.
It was actually Zeta.
Okay. Yeah, I've set one 10 lines puzzle. and I set an ambiguous 10 lines puzzle. They're kind of fun. I mean, they're sort of Renban-ish in a way. Although the repeating digit part always screws me whenever I solve those. Kajita, what about you?
I mean, 10 lines is certainly a good shout. I wouldn't actually, that wasn't on the forefront of my mind, but that's a good one. 10 lines can be a little hard for me, but I feel like I probably need to do them more, but I've enjoyed the puzzles I've solved with them. Then honestly, and I know this is probably going to be an unpopular opinion, but I personally think vaults are pretty cool and should be used more. But
I actually agree with you. I think they're pretty cool.
Can you explain just for the audience what vaults are, for those who may not know what a vault is?
Yeah, so vaults are like visually look like killer cages, but except they're not. Instead of killer cages, digits can repeat inside the cage, but all the digits inside the cage can't be touching the cage, so they can't be adjacent to the cage. They can't be in any cells that touch it. That's pretty much the basic concept.
And I solved your. I think you used vaults in your recent
ripples. Yeah.
Ripples, yeah. And I actually enjoyed that. Although I think my instinct there, I've not solved that many vault puzzles, and my instinct was just to start coloring immediately which was necessary, but I should have been. I think I ended up coloring the wrong place first, and then I actually had to start thinking about the math a bit more.
Well, that puzzle I was certainly hamstrung a little bit, right? Because it wasn't a pure vaults; it was like that archery range deal where it gets bigger. I was pretty limited in terms of the tools that I had to work with to try to make the puzzle any easier. Was slim.
I mean, I enjoyed it immensely. It was a very good puzzle. I definitely enjoyed that.
Yeah.
James, have you set with vaults yet? Is this something you now need to try?
No, I haven't. I'm not even sure if I've ever solved one, but I've probably watched one or two solved videos. But yeah, that's definitely a constraint that I would like to mess around with.
We found one that you're under.
We need some approachable vault puzzles, James. We need some.
Yeah.
Get them.
Okay, yeah. So if anyone in the chat wants approachable puzzles with a particular constraint, send it over to James. Just hit James up, and he'll just. That's it. For a fee, of course, and we'll take.
I'd like some approachable ear switch. It's like a look and say.
Killer.
Little killer, yeah. Yeah, could you do that by Monday?
Demono said, "When's the last time?"
Good, or does that not matter?
Demono said, "When's the last time someone said a slingshot Sudoku?" I haven't said it recently, but I did have a slingshot Sudoku called Trebuchet, which is actually it combines slingshot with other constraints, but it's 4 6x6 grids, and the idea there was that a digit in one grid could be slingshot into the next grid over, and I thought that was a really, really good idea, but then I realized I actually had to make 4 separate puzzles, so I don't know what I was thinking there, but yeah, I was pleased how that one came out. But yeah, slingshot is an interesting one. I kind of feel like every time we talk about a constraint now, we have to ask James if he's used it. So,
I have not used slingshots.
AEM Meow asked what I think is a really good question earlier.
What was that?
Do you have to be good at solving a variant before you try setting it, or can setting puzzles be a way to learn the ins and outs of a rule set? I think that's a good question.
That is a very good question. I can start with that. I mean, I guess my practice tends to be that if I want to set a puzzle with a variant, I do try and I do try and solve at least two or three puzzles with it, and then I sort of just let it go from there. I tend not to be someone, and this actually can be something else we can discuss. I tend not to be somebody who throws many puzzles out. I tend to just fight my way through a puzzle until it's set, and then I move on to the next one. But I think, I mean, me personally, I don't necessarily, I do 2 or 3 solves unless it's something that I've solved a lot of already before I at least try setting. I wouldn't go crazy with it because I also want to try and solve, I also, when I'm setting a puzzle, I want to at least try and have something slightly different or interesting in it. And I think one issue I found is that if I do too many puzzles, I nearly always end up just ripping off some piece of logic from one of those puzzles as a start of my own. How do you guys feel on that one? Whoever wants to chime in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, I'm not going to say that you have to have solved puzzles of a certain type to make one of that type, because, you know, but I mean, I think it'd be very hard otherwise, and you know, if you're trying something that's pretty novel, then maybe there aren't puzzles with that variant to solve, and so I think then it's something to kind of set of your own, whether they're first drafts or just kind of puzzles that you're not going to put out
Is
there,
James
but
breaking up
that's
for you
certainly
guys?
a way to learn a variant.
Yeah, James, yeah, I think you're breaking up a little for us. I got most of what you were saying there, but it keeps getting a little spotty. I don't know if
I wasn't sure if it was just
anything is up on your settings.
I'm sure if what I was saying was all that cogent, so probably fair enough.
Since I brought up the question, I guess I may as well just chime in and just say I think setting's a great exercise to learn constraints and to learn about puzzles in general. To be honest, you can really I'm a bit odd in the sense that I will sometimes try to set a variant that I've never solved or really thought about at all, and just kind of just jump into it. I mean, and not even standard variants, right? Obviously, if I come up with some crazy rule set, then I'm going to be doing that anyways. But there will be standard variants. I have no problems just jumping in and just kind of just diving right in. And, you know, for me, it's like if you come up with something that's no good or like kind of lame, well, you know, that's what, you know, it's not the end of the world. Right? It's just, it's like hopefully you've learned something, and, you know, maybe you can try again with the rules and using what you've learned. But, you know, I think setting is really fun. And so, I mean, just jumping in and using setting as a way to learn a constraint is also fun for me.
I do think it does depend on the constraint or the genre. If you're setting pencil puzzles, I was trying to do a series on my YouTube channel, which was basically I would solve one puzzle from a pencil puzzle genre and then try to set a puzzle from that genre that I had never set or solved before. And I stopped doing that after the first video because the second video was so much editing that I never got through it because I spent 3 hours figuring out how to get any real deductions going on in this pencil puzzle. Yeah, it made sense when I solved the first one, but I couldn't think of anything other than the deductions from exactly that puzzle. So it kind of depends on what you're looking at, and especially if it's something where the deduction itself depends on the final result. So you'd have to put the clues in to see what is happening, which is Sudoku is unique in that we have these sort of background rules where we're adding variants on top, so you can always make progress. And usually, if you're not using a negative constraint, it's not like it's going to be different if you don't make sure you don't add anything in this area. But yeah, definitely some genres of pencil puzzles are pretty much impossible to set if you have not solved like 40 of them already. So that series did not last very long.
That's a good, actually. So, James, have you set any pencil puzzles, like pure pencil puzzles?
Not very many, and the ones I have were for like Secret Santa or Secret Satan, which And in fact, I did make a Kuchaku last year with the help of the world's preeminent Kuchaku expert, Wessel.
And I've set pencil puzzle hybrids, but I've not set pure pencil puzzle. Kajito, I know you did. I know you set a U-Bahn recently that it's been on my list to solve, and I actually did start solving it, but it was like 11 o'clock at night, and I'm not great at U-Bahn at the best of times, so I sort of stopped because I was like, U-Bahn at 11 o'clock at night is not going to get me to sleep.
That particular U-Bahn though is, I mean, I suppose it's a really nice U-Bahn. I mean, so Pietato brought it to my attention that apparently that's still, and it still is, the only vanilla U-Bahn that is rated 100% on LMD. Not that I put like a ton of stock into the LMD ratings, because there's more important things going on in the world than LMD ratings. But
is there?
But I was also just going to jump in and say, you say Pietato, I say Pietato.
But that puzzle is I don't know. I went into that like deliberately. I suppose you were talking about like a Turganus, like how he had like sort of escalating curve. And I mean, my goal was the beginning of that puzzle is like absurdly easy, trivially easy, and then it just kind of gradually goes up. And that was kind of the whole idea of that puzzle. And I don't know, it's kind of fun. I mean, I'd set my like a weird U-Bahn variant before that, but that was my first time trying to set like a vanilla U-Bahn, and it was just kind of nice to do something simple at the start. And then as I learned more, I could do more advanced stuff.
Yeah, the hybrids I set. I mean, I again, there's always the added thing of you're setting it in a Sudoku, but I think I nearly always ended up having solved a puzzle that I liked. So I did a Nurimisaki Sudoku, and I think I had solved one that Pulverizing Pancake had done with thermos, and I was like, oh, I enjoyed that. I could see how that could apply to something else. And so I had like the barest experience with it. I mean, I did end up breaking that one a lot. And then I did a yin yang killer recently that I'd solved one that Playmaker had done, and I was like, I'd done a couple of yin yangs as well. I was like, let me give it a shot, and again, I ended up breaking that. I mean, it made the setting process a little frustrating. I ended up breaking it a few times because the shading never worked out, but I was able to make it through eventually. But would you say, I guess the nature, just the nature of like certainly something like U-Bahn. I mean, I feel I wouldn't even know where to begin with the U-Bahn.
U-Bahn is a really, really tricky genre. When I say that, I mean from the context of so like Sudoku, you have an entire a whole array of difficulties. You can find an easy rated difficulty out of the newspaper and solve it in 3 minutes, or you can try to solve 3D wave particles without having watched the video of it.
Right.
So it's like Sudoku has a wide array of difficulties, and I actually think U-Bahn, while it's extremely diverse and has a lot of depth, it really does kind of lack that. There's not really a lot of trivial U-Bahns, partially because trivial U-Bahns aren't really any fun. It's like you just, this is a straight line across the grid, and it's like, well, that's done. I don't know. It's an interesting dilemma for the genre, but it's kind of, it makes it harder to get into, I do think. But it is, I have enjoyed my time doing it. But
what I'm hearing from you, I was going to say, what I'm hearing from you is we need some approachable U-Bahns. So
if such a thing can be made,
James.
Sorry, Memeristor, you were gonna say something.
I was gonna say, coming back to AEM Meow's question, I don't even know if solving UBAN is a good way to learn UBAN. You kind of need someone to start with some of those tricks.
I would say my experience. I mean, so that puzzle leaving the basement, that's the Uban that we're talking about that I recently set, vanilla Uban. The initial version of that was broken. So like even in that, there were things I still had to learn as I got through that process. And I would agree that in particular for Uban, it's not exactly easy to learn just by sitting there solving them, in the sense that there is always more to learn. So
from that perspective, I would say, so Woofer ZFG had created like a sort of guide to Uban, and actually having read that a couple of times, that actually sort of at least helped me understand how to approach them. And then from watching, from having watched, I would say watched rather than actually helped, but having watched Zeta solve a few, he's been on a bit of an Uban kick lately. That kind of, at least I begin to grasp a little better the deductions for it. Still not making me want to rush out and solve a whole load of them, but you know. So one thing, like you mentioned, L&D ratings, and I mean, I kind of agree on the stock. On the beauty side, don't take much stock in that. But what about the difficulty side? And we've had, I know this is the age-old question, or the age-old thing that keeps getting brought up all the time, but about difficulty creep. So I guess from James, from someone who's sort of tends to set more approachable puzzles, do you feel that your more approachable puzzles now are more comparable to, say, what would be considered harder puzzles back in the day?
Yeah, so I think there.
I think we all can't hear James.
Yeah, I'm sorry, James. I think your sound is breaking up for some reason.
Did you move your mic, James, somehow?
Is it something with your setting, perhaps? Yeah, let's just see. Sorry, just minor technical issue here. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, I can see. Okay, do you want to try talking now, James? Not hearing.
Well, he's on mute. Oh, what?
All right. Am
Okay,
I back?
Oh yeah, you're way better now.
Oh yeah, that's much better. Okay, yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
Glad we did
All
that.
right. And can you all hear each other still?
Yeah.
That was like a gradual degeneration into just.
Yeah. And we know James doesn't have a stutter, so all right. So yeah, back to. Sorry about that, everyone. Back to the point. Do you feel like your puzzles are pretty consistent looking back? Do you think your puzzles nowadays are perhaps closer to harder ones?
Yeah. I was just thinking about one of the first ones that I ever posted that I was really proud of was called Ghost Digit, and I think it got 4 stars. When the rating first appeared, and I'm pretty confident that to post that now, it would be 2 at most. It would probably oscillate between, I don't know, maybe not 1, but yeah, I mean, it was just not that complicated of a puzzle.
I certainly, so one thing I've started doing lately, just just for my own interest, is kind of going back to some of my earlier puzzles that I've forgotten what the solve path is or vaguely know. And yeah, I definitely think some of my puzzles back in the day that were like 4 stars, or I look at now and I'm like, how could that have been 4 stars? I think compared to some now that is 3 for sure. I think as deductions, I guess, have gotten more. I don't know. What would you think, as you guys answer, what would you think is underlying causes of this? Is it just that people are getting better at Sudokus?
Well, I mean, my personal experience is that I find that as I continue setting, I'm always looking for things that are interesting to me that I haven't seen before, or that I'm seeking out a certain feeling of like insight, and that feeling is only achieved I guess the kind of logic that goes into getting there for me just continues to get harder as I get better and better at puzzles. So it's something I have to be kind of aware of, and like, man, this might just be it's like, because my goal isn't to make puzzles that are crazy hard. So it's like, if I feel like, it's like sometimes there are steps in the puzzles. Honestly, my comfort range is really around 4 stars. Like for me, it's like I don't want puzzles to be taking like, I know lately I've been on a kind of a bender of 5-star puzzles, but it's like I don't really want puzzles to take like hours and hours to solve for the most part. I want, it's like I want to demonstrate something kind of cool, and then that's it. But I haven't really gone back. It's funny. Just the other day, Damasosos was stream solving in Discord one of Stefan Bira's Compass puzzles from 2021. And he had it listed at 3 stars, and then when it got rated, it was so it hadn't been rated yet, but it was an obvious 5-star puzzle. It was like very hard. So it's like, I don't know. It's interesting. I think some puzzles, and in particular some variants, people's knowledge of has just advanced so much that that you go back to some of the early puzzles that were set with it. Like, I'm sure if I solved, say, I think the first region sumline puzzle I've solved was, I know Ransk made it, but the first one I solved was by Kodak. And I feel like if I went, and it took me a little while, but I feel like if I went back and solved that, it would be so much easier now. And it's just because it's been explored a lot. It's like there's been a lot of them.
That is actually a misconception. When Ranks did not make regions online, he just popularized it.
Oh, okay. Well, then there you go.
I guess,
I think I've gotten credit for making variants I didn't make as well.
I guess it's kind of it's something akin to the lines of like, was it? I forget. I want to say it might have been Mark. It was Mark or Simon who was talking on CTC about back in maybe the late 90s or early aughts, when there was an X-Wing was put in a classic Sudoku, and I think Thomas Snyder was like aghast at the idea of an X-Wing. Like, who could put this in a classic Sudoku? And like, what is this nonsense? This is like some kind of, and it's like, well, now, like, I think the X-Wing is now considered like maybe on like one of the lower tier sort of classic Sudoku tricks, or even variant Sudoku tricks. So yeah, I guess it's fair. Like as things become more explored. Memeristor, we had a pretty thorough discussion of this, I know, on your channel. So where do you land on this whole thing?
It's kind of weird because at the time I hadn't actually like seen it with my own eyes, but it's been, I don't know, like, I guess it's been like 4 years since I started setting. So puzzles have been in LMD for a long time. Not a long time, but a relatively extended period of time. And I have actually witnessed their ratings dropping. Like, people still go back and solve some of my earlier puzzles, and the ratings have been slowly dropping over time. Like I think I have like one 5-star puzzle remaining from 2021, 22. But like that's from like 8 maybe, and all of them have like dropped down to 4-star.
Oh,
Because
interesting.
I guess people have just rated them lower. Because they
Well,
are
now
actually just
now there
easy.
certainly since 2021 there have been an influx of like really mind-bogglingly hard puzzles.
Yeah.
And I think some people do definitely measure the scale differently than they used to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think ASM Meow makes a very good point as well. Like, what's difficult is evaluated in other fields as well. I mean, so as I mentioned, I'm like in biochemistry and cancer biology. And when I think of what I learned in university, which was longer than I care to say ago, and I think of some of the technology and some of the techniques and some of the concepts that undergrads at my institute are learning about now, are just kind of, they're so far above my head. I mean, it's crazy. But so I guess it does kind of happen as people become more familiar with it. I also think, we can just call him ASM Meow, Meow or Anne. But I do think there are also, and we've talked about this as well, I think there can also be different types of difficulty. So like there's a difficulty, like Kajito said, about you can have a puzzle that's going to take you 5 hours to do. And because it's a lot of, maybe not necessarily individually, maybe not the steps are necessarily too hard, but they kind of add up to just the sort of marathon puzzles. And I think KNT does a lot of those. But then there are also the ones where you have just like really a really, really hard step just built into a puzzle. And for me, that nearly always ends up being the beginning. Would you say that you try to front load your hardest steps for the beginning? I mean, I guess, James, for you, because your puzzles tend to be certainly more consistent difficulty and more approachable than most.
Yeah, I mean, even with my harder ones, I'll kind of try to keep them difficult throughout. But yeah, I agree. There's kind of different dimensions of difficulty. There's puzzles that are difficult because the constraint is unfamiliar, or they're difficult because it's clear what it's asking for, but the notation system is complicated and you have to do kind of shading and lettering and stuff like that. Or there's chaos construction where there's there's like kind of I don't know. There's too many dimensions to difficulty to capture it all in one scale, certainly.
And I think a sort of we've had discussions about like a closed-ended scale may not be the best. I want to say it was actually in the discussion we had on Memeristor's channel. I want to say that Bremster suggested the idea of like there should be to try and have like an open-ended difficulty, like rather than having something rate on a scale of 1 to 5 that you can just keep. As puzzles get more complex and more difficult, then the difficulty can keep going up and up. The other thing would be to get rid of maybe the stars and to kind of do it more as a descriptive, but then I guess that even becomes harder to capture.
It's an interesting concept because it's not totally unprecedented. I mean, I know that like in climbing, I think they are at 9. I think they're at 9B. I don't think there's a 9C. But they have ratings for bouldering, and
also,
the only way what
the rating for the climb is not about the climb itself, but it's actually about the beta that's been done, the actual like climb that's been done, and techniques have been developed over time. So climbs get down, like actual physical like rock climbing on mountains and stuff, get downgraded from like there was a 9C and then it got downgraded to 9B because someone figured out a beta that made it easier by going a different path.
Yeah, that's true. So, but then also,
it's the same
so
with
like
puzzles,
in terms of like, because you have to figure people are probably better at climbing today than they were in the 50s, for example. But So then, like, I guess kind of the way that community has sort of done this sort of rating system is where, like, in order for a boulder to get rated at, harder than the current hardest difficulty, it has to be completed by someone who has solved those difficulty boulders, which is a given, to be totally honest with you. No random person is going to solve the hardest boulder in the world. But and then they have to decide that there is something objectively harder about that boulder than literally anything else in that category. And then then it's like you have a new entry on the scale.
I was going to say, it's funny you mentioned the 50s, because wasn't that when Everest was first scaled, 1952?
Well, so that's like that's a totally different kind of climbing.
I know. I'm just messing with you. Just showing off the trivia, Well, that being said, though, I was at a conference recently, and there was a lab that had paid 2 graduate students to climb 2/3 of the way up Everest and stay up there for 3 months. And I was like, they just like, did these grad students know this when they were signing on to the course? I don't know. But
it kind of reminds me of in astronomy, we still use that the brightness scale, which goes more negative for things that are less bright. So it's like the magnitude of something in the sky. But then we had to think about maybe adjusting this when we were talking about absolute magnitude. So if you're like a specific one Earth distance from the sun away from a much brighter or bigger star, it would be like plus 50 or something. But it's minus 50. They did it in reverse. Sorry, I'm saying it the other way around. So they did it in reverse. So the less bright something is, the more close it is to 0. So it's more negative if it's more bright. It's so stupid. Anyways, so it's the wrong way around for what you should be doing. And then, yeah.
Wasn't there a whole thing of like that with the negative diagonal and the positive diagonal that Zeta gets worked up about, that they're the wrong way around? Like the negative should be the positive or something. I don't know.
Zeta thinks about it like a mathematician, because you can talk about the row count and the column count go up, then that's positive. That's how he thinks about it.
I get confused whenever someone starts talking about that, because it's both ways in my head, but I just like dissociate it. So I'm like, wait, which way is which? I don't remember now.
Yeah. True. All right. So, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of the subjects I had wanted to bring up. Are there any things that you guys wanted to touch upon? I know in the chat we had before the stream, you would some of you had expressed a couple ideas in mind. Feel free to speak up. Memeristor, I think you had some subjects you said we never really got to touch on.
Those were in a document that I couldn't find.
Okay. James, how about you? Anything?
Oh, I'm sorry. I had not thought of subjects and documents that I've lost, so I'll take that as a win.
Well, I guess one thing that sort of springs to mind. Have any of you ever written set puzzles that you've then thrown out, and that are puzzles that will never see the light of day?
All the time.
All the time. Interesting. Have any of you set puzzles, I guess, that you then have substantially reworked? James, I'd be particularly interested to hear about this from you, given that you're quite prolific in setting puzzles. What's your process on that? Do you kind of have a very quick, you set it, you test it, you throw it out there, it's good, or?
Yeah, I guess, so when I kind of go through my puzzles to test them, I'm usually going through the ones from like 2 or 3 months ago. And so inevitably there'll be some where I'm like, this isn't very good, or this just kind of needs to be reworked a little bit. And I'll like kind of leave a note to myself. And then a lot of those just kind of get forgotten. And lately I've been trying to take about one day a month and like go through those and actually try to like rework them, which has actually yielded some puzzles I'm pretty happy with. But also, yeah, there's probably a bunch just that are like one clue away from being pretty good that I've just kind of forgotten about.
I mean, I guess given that you're setting for your new newsletter, you have to have some kind of process to go back and because you have your own self-imposed deadline, right?
Yeah, and I guess just for whatever reason, I've kind of never gotten in the habit of sharing my puzzles with other people to test. I don't know. I'm sure I'd benefit from that, but I've just always kind of done my own testing, and so this is the system I've worked out to make that work.
I mean, it seems to be doing pretty fine so far. How about you, Kajita? You said you've thrown some out. Are they ones that you're just like they're done, never coming back again, or?
No. For the most part, I don't generally make that decision. I just don't get to them. A lot of times it'll be a puzzle. I may even, like when I say it never sees the light of day again. I guess what I mean is that it has, right? I sent it in testing or sent it out to people. I've had you test a puzzle. Do you remember the region sum lines? I don't know if there was like a region sum lines. That's just one of many examples where it was kind of like circled around the grid, and it.
Was that involving?
This was like 2 years ago, so if you don't remember, that's.
No, I remember testing one for you that I don't think I ever saw, and it was something to do with. Was it region sum lines in it? I feel like it was something to do with crop key ratios or something like that.
I don't think so. One? It was like about. I struggle to totally remember it off, but it was like a big circle around the grid, essentially. But it's like there's like a lot of times I'll just make a puzzle and I'll even be happy with it sometimes, and I just kind of don't publish it. I don't know. I just don't go through the trouble of publishing it. I mean, really, setting puzzles for me is somewhat of a selfish thing in the sense that like I enjoy sharing the puzzles, and I enjoy when other people enjoy my puzzles, but also it's like I feel no obligation if I set a puzzle and I just kind of like, I don't know, something about it, whatever it is, it could be anything, something about it, I just don't really want to publish that. It may not be that it's bad, it may just I just kind of just don't, it just never really gets outside of the testing channels for whatever reason.
How about you, Memeristor?
Maybe a couple years ago, I would have said absolutely not. And around that time, I had interviewed Jovial. For those of you who remember Jovial, because she's been gone for so long and not been making puzzles. And she was saying that she often just sets puzzles and then just closes the tab and is like, "Oh, we're done with that. Moving on." And it made me so mad, and even more mad now because she hasn't set puzzles for so long. There were so many that we're missing now. Frustrating. Jovi, give us the puzzles that you close the tab.
Yeah, I think Jovi may have actually come back to the CTC server.
What? Okay, she came back to the CTC server.
Just recently, back. I believe. Yeah. Yeah,
Jovial is definitely one of my favorite constructors. So. Good to see her back.
I do remember that whole interview though, where you were just like, "What?" And it was like the chat
very distraught,
almost trying to guilt her into publishing the puzzles.
Anyways, but myself. So I think about 2 years ago, I said no. Like I work on everything until it's like it's done, it's good, and then I publish it. But I started like just setting puzzles on the train, on the commute, and I don't publish very many of those, if any of them, really. I think maybe I published one of them. I kind of just like mess around, and like James does, I just kind of leave them there. Thankfully, Chrome has this new thing where it's like inactive tabs. If you haven't touched the tab for 21 days, then it hides it. Oh, lifesaver. I had like 80 tabs open. Just scroll past all of them every single time.
80 tabs?
Yes. Of various puzzles. But But
I have
Yeah.
a sticker on my whiteboard in my office at work that says my brain has too many tabs open. Apparently yours does too.
sometimes I'll go back and solve a couple of them, and then I'll be like, "Oh, that was cool," and then just never look at it again. But sometimes I'll throw them in testing if I solve them. And I'm like, "Oh, that's actually a good puzzle."
So actually, Demono asked a question as well, and I mean, this is interesting, I guess, because James said like he's not very patient. He gets to like 45 minutes to an hour, maybe exaggerating a little, and then he's moving on to the next thing. But Demono said, "What is the longest time you've spent setting a single puzzle?" So, James, have at it.
I mean, it was probably second rodeo, the one that we did together. And even if we kind of separated out my time on that, and maybe part of that's that I, don't want to like drop the ball when I'm working with you. But yeah, I don't know, maybe said 10 hours on that. So that's obviously over the course of several days.
Yeah, I would say that's. Would I say I spent about the same amount of time? I maybe spent a little amount of time on it. One thing I tend to find, I mean, I'm answering that question. I guess I'm not 100% sure, because one thing I tend to find is that if I have a puzzle that's really sort of hooked me in, then I can just like come home of an evening, eat, and then I'll just be sitting on my sofa like working on it, and then it will be like 11:30. I'm like, where the hell's the time gone? It just like sucks me into it. I almost get in like the zone. And I know definitely for a couple of times with second rodeo, I think mostly when I was trying to get your original idea to work.
Be fundamentally flawed break-in. Yeah.
Yeah. That was that really I was like on that for a good 3 or 4 evenings. So Kajito, you've set some, I mean, your full rank deconstruction, would that be your longest, or other ones?
I don't think it is anymore. But
oh God help us.
The league puzzle I shared with you is almost certainly okay. Now that was that okay, so I don't know, I guess it depends if you call it a puzzle, because I gave up on it eventually. But the full rank deconstruction probably took about, I mean, I don't even know. It was so frustrating to set. I can't even, it's like just absurd, but probably somewhere in the range of 40 to 50 hours. Now that said, the league puzzle, I'm pretty sure I probably spent 80 to 100 hours on, and then gave up, and then set something else. It's just, but that the league puzzle though there are reasons for that. I can't really get into it too much, why it took so long. It was a different exercise that I was going through. It wasn't like a normal setting process. And it was also intentionally going to, I mean, the idea was to make it just completely ridiculous, but
apparently it was achieved.
Yeah, well, the real kind of watershed moment I had was when I found like a broken part, like, and I was like, oh, okay, I got to go back and I gotta fix this, And I went back and I was trying to fix it, and I was trying to recreate. I was trying to go through the puzzle with this fixed, and I kind of realized, like, man, this puzzle stinks. This is not very fun. So then that was really the point where I just kind of scrapped it. But yeah, the full rank deconstruction was the longest I've spent on a puzzle that I actually saw to completion, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And Memeristor, how about you?
Not consistently setting, but I've definitely had puzzles that I've set a little bit and then left it, and then set a little bit and left it and set a little bit, and I have no idea how long I've spent on it in total, over like multiple years at this point. So yeah, there are some that are just sitting there in the inactive tabs mocking me. But
oh dear.
there
I
was
think...
one. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Carry on.
There was one that I think it was my last CGC feature, which was, I don't know, like forever ago. Messier 43, I want to say. And I think it's
Galaxy one?
Yeah, Galaxy. Build your own Galaxy equals some line. And the break into that was so good, and I liked it so much that I refused to let go. And that was at a time when I was on a break from work. So I had all day, every day, for probably at least a week. And I just spent the entire day, every day of that week, trying to get that to work. And then when I thought I finally finished it, I realized I had made an assumption. And one implication went one way, but not the other way. It was like, oh, if these are at least 15, then they must be from 6, 7, 8, 9. But then for some reason in my head, I thought at least 15, that means they are 15. And then I spent another like at least 3 full like work days thinking about how I could recreate the puzzle, and then realizing that I could make it so that they had to be at least or exactly 15 through another thing. And then there was a deduction.
Much rejoicing.
Yes, much rejoicing. And then there was a deduction that came from that, which was absolutely amazing. And it's in the final puzzle. But when I went to go test, like send it to testing, I think Codex said that it was too hard. So then I spent another like 2 days thinking about how I could change it, and I couldn't. So I spent like at least 2 weeks on trying to set that puzzle, like actual full work days.
I think the thing that I'm most impressed by in that whole story is the fact you said you spent all day, every day working on the puzzle, and that you have 2 cats, and you were able to spend all day, every day working on the puzzle without the cats driving you crazy.
I do get quite annoyed when I'm trying to, like, I have the laptop on my lap and I'm working, and then the cat's like, I want to come sit on you. I'm like, okay, I'll move the laptop over, but I'll still like do this or something. And then they don't sit down. They just like stand on you, and you're like,
yeah.
you promised that you would sit down. At least this would give me comfort, but it's making me anxious that you're just looking at me. You're going to jump on the keyboard and ruin everything. You're going to reload my tabs and I'll lose everything.
Okay, so just one last question from the chat, and then I think we're going to wrap up for the next part. Powerfly said, "You guys think that a puzzle that's impressive that they can be set, for example, very minimally clued puzzles like White Room, should be justified to have a less smooth solve path?" I mean, I would say from that, I think the nature. I mean, I actually, rather bizarrely, I actually watched the White Room feature just yesterday, and one thing that I think is incredibly impressive with that puzzle is that once you get the sort of trick of how to approach it, which is with the coloring, it actually is an incredibly smooth solve. I think it actually only takes Simon something like 25 minutes to do it.
I solved it just the other day, and it was very smooth.
Yeah, and I think it's. I mean, by the time you get to the end, and I think you have to just, isn't it a Y-wing or something at the end that just collapses the whole thing? But by the nature of it, oh no, yeah, no, I agree, Paulfly. I was going to say though, I think that White Room is probably more of the exception than the rule, and I think the nature of those puzzles that have such few minimally placed clues is that there's probably going to be some particularly hard step in it. I don't know whether I would say it's justified or not. I think that gets into like what are hard deductions. Like, I think you have to have a balance of, if you have a particularly hard deduction, it has to be balanced by a fair amount of reward to be able to justify it. Would you guys agree on that? My God, your cat purrs loudly, I can hear. If anyone wants to jump in on that.
I mean, the solve path is everything, isn't it? Like, what is a puzzle without a solve path?
Do you try and balance, like, if you think you have a particularly hard deduction, do you try and balance it with a reward, or maybe making the next one a little smoother, or is that less of an issue for you, James?
I mean, sure, yeah. You want, if the solver does something difficult, you want that to be rewarded.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, just because something can be solved doesn't always mean that like it needs to be put out there and spread widely.
Yeah.
The way I've always thought about it is that the goal when you're so I would say like my roller coaster nerd hobby. I know that drew a lot of like awe from people as far as just how minimal it was, etc. But
it was a great puzzle.
Yeah, say. But it's like for me, I've never. I personally don't think so. I just don't find it super impressive unless I'm told up front that the puzzle is really more of like an exercise in construction. It's like if I'm aware of that, then maybe I think about it differently. But like for me, the most impressive thing is the path. So it's like that is the most impressive part of a puzzle. Like if I'm solving it and the path feels janky, it simply is less impressive for me.
And Meme, do you want to have the final word on this before we move on to part 2?
Yeah, I've never really vibed with the blank grid crowd who's like, if we could get a blank grid where the rules are an essay, but the grid is blank, then hallelujah, that is the goal, that is the end result. Like, no. That's never a good puzzle. Well, it could be a good puzzle. There are puzzles like that are good, but that should not be the goal. That is not like the hallelujah, the end result. No, please stop trying.
Yeah, I think you definitely have to have a degree. I think like one puzzle that probably brought a lot of attention and may have brought a few of us here is the Miracle Sudoku, the original Miracle Sudoku. But that was just brilliantly constructed. That was just a really, really very well put together construction. So,
yeah, but as we saw in the Miracle app, it wasn't the puzzle itself, but just the idea to have all those things together that was so impressive. So making a ton of Miracle Sudokus is not necessarily a good thing.
Okay, well,
I just want to shout out.
Sure.
Top Autism had one called Simple Empty Miracle that I published in my newsletter a few months ago. That's just an empty grid with a really simple rule set that I thought had a really nice solve path. So yeah, it can be done, but it's rare.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, I mean, we've actually been going for just over a hair over 2 hours, and I know we could continue for a while, but we did promise. I did promise some Jeopardy, puzzle-related Jeopardy. So we're going to move on to the second part of the stream. Before we do that, though, I just want to remind everyone in chat again that tickets are now on sale for SudokuCon. You can type !tickets, or if you want to donate as well, just do !donate, as it says on the bottom of the screen. And with that, we are now, I'm going to whisper to our production team to switch us over to Jeopardy.